So today we are going to talk about hardening off. Lots of you have been growing along with me and you're wondering which plants now you can take out to harden off in the garden. You can harden off anything that we started at the back end of last year. So anything that has been growing in the greenhouse slowly and steadily over the winter. You may notice that your plants are not quite as big as they were in previous years. That is just down to the temperature. The control for growth in plants is affected by light, which we know, but also temperature. So if your plants are smaller, it's just because we've come through such a cold winter, and they will soon catch up, don't worry. So if you're looking for a list, if you turn to page 14 of your Autumn Jump Starter Handbook, you've got the hardiness ratings and a list of all the plants from the Autumn Jump Starter just there for you. So much about temperature this year, and now the temperatures have lifted, you're probably thinking that you can rush your trays straight out into the garden to start the hardening off process. Let me just take you through the steps quickly first before you start moving your trays, just so you understand it a little bit better and what you're doing. I know something like larkspur or wild carrot or Alea grandiflora are very hardy, cold hardy. They have been in a closed environment all winter, so their epidermis hasn't had a chance to harden up. Now, the epidermis is where the stomata is located. The stomata is the pores that the water is able to leave the plant. So the transpiration where it comes up from the roots, out through the leaves, that's the stomata. Now, just in one tiny section of leaf, you can have thousands of stomata where the water will leave the plant. However, the epidermis and the cuticle need strengthening up because they will protect the stomata, and a thicker cuticle prevents too much water loss, which is why if you take your seedlings, if you germinate them in the house and then take them straight outside and put them on the patio, or take something that's quite young from the greenhouse and put it straight out in the wind, because it doesn't have the epidermis and the cuticle protecting the stomata just opens, lets all the water out, and then the plant quickly wilts. Sunshine as well speeds up the rate of transpiration. So if you put something outside in the wind and in the sun without hardening it off properly, it will just wilt on you. That's the reason why. It might be a good idea to show you an example. I've got a sweet pea here that I started late winter, so I'm going to compare that with you now to the sweet peas that have been hardening off and are now down at the sweet pea area preparing for planting time. Okay, so here's my lovely sweet pea that I've been growing in a closed environment, and you can see, just look how delicate the leaves are. So if this was placed straight outside into the sunshine, and it's quite a strong wind today, if you just place it straight out, the chances are that these leaves will start to burn and shrivel up, and you will damage your plants. So compare that to these sweet peas, which we have been hardening off now for a couple of weeks. You can actually see how much thicker the leaves are. That cuticle is really toughened up, and that will be protecting the stomata so it doesn't lose too much water. I mean, look at those stems. The plants look visibly different, don't they? Can you see how much the wind is blowing that about? And what it's also doing is it's blowing all the moisture away from the leaves. The leaves are thin, so it's just letting all the water go, and then it's pulling and pulling and pulling, and it could very well wilt if it's allowed to get too exposed. So that's why we harden it off, get them toughened up. I'll put this outside in a shelter spot now, and we'll revisit it in about a week. It's not batting an eye in the wind. It's so much tougher, and the leaves are thicker, so they won't lose their moisture as quickly. So that is ready to plant out, and it's good down to -15, but I'm not good down to -15, so I'm going to put it back for now. One thing you have to be really careful with is the rain, because if we get torrential downpours, and that's what it looks like this week, we need to be careful. We've got lovely warm temperatures, it is a bit breezy, have a nice bit of sunshine, but there is a risk of rain. And you can see behind me, this sweet pea house has got a roof where the sweet peas are. If we get a torrential downpour, you risk flooding and drowning your plants in their trays, but you also might get some physical damage where the rain on those delicate leaves that haven't been hardened off yet could accidentally snap. So you just need to make sure wherever you're hardening off, you've got a roof. Step one for hardening off is all the way back from germinating your seeds and then bringing them out to a closed environment such as a greenhouse, and they will stay there for several weeks, if not months. Is to move them to a sheltered but more exposed location. So you know I love my cold frames. They're in a shelter spot this side of the greenhouse. They've got roofs, but they're completely open and they can let the breeze blow through. I will leave them there for about a week before I move them to the other cold frames, which are a lot more exposed, a lot more wind. They still have the roofs because we need to be careful of the rain, just in case it washes all the compost away. Just be really careful if you've got tender seedlings and you move them and put them straight outside the front of the greenhouse, and we've got sunshine, we've got wind, and they haven't had a chance to thicken up their epidermis yet, then you could risk losing some of your plants. But I suspect you'd like to have all this written down, wouldn't you? One second, I'll show you. So if you turn to page 15 of your Autumn Jump Starter Handbook, I have got the steps here for hardening off, so you can have a little read with a cup of tea later. And then if you're following the Spring Grow Along, I've got the hardiness ratings on page 16 of the Spring Grow Along Handbook for the plants that are included in the Spring Grow Along Handbook, so not the Autumn Jump Starter seeds. And for the Spring Grow Along Handbook, can you hear that wind? Be careful. Page 7 of the Spring Grow Along Handbook's got the hardening information steps for you there as well. Just a couple of last things before I go and check on my own plants. Number one, once they're out in the cold frames, please keep an eye on the watering. It is so easy to forget. Once they go out under those cold frames, they're not getting any of the rain, and the wind will dry out the compost quicker than they would have done it in a closed environment. You're into the habit now of checking your greenhouses regularly, but cold frames are now new. So maybe put an alarm on your phone so you check them every couple of days for watering. Finally, just use your common sense. If your plants are a little on the small side, they're probably best just left in the greenhouse. You're going to have to go through the harden off process anyway. But the reason that they're smaller is because it's been a cold winter. It is warmer in the greenhouse, so they will catch up faster. So if your snapdragons, for example, are looking a little bit on the small side, I know that some of you have been messaging me about your snapdragons, leave them in the greenhouse. They'll grow faster in the greenhouse. We'll plant them out a bit later, but then they'll flower a bit later. Everything will be fine in the end. It's only March, we've got ages yet. After all our conversation, I thought you might like to have a quick look at my cold frame area. This is the more exposed cold frames. So these plants were under the sheltered cold frames for a couple of weeks and are now ready to dance about in this more exposed area. They're literally almost ready for planting out now. And then these are my more sheltered cold frames. These plants have been here a couple of days. You can see, look at them dancing in the breeze. These plants are mostly trials, so I'm very excited to be showing you those later on in the season.